I want to share the recent guidelines that you shared with me that all dietitians are given. They're pretty wild.
This is specifically for type 2 diabetes. So this is for somebody who cannot tolerate carbohydrates. Basically, dietitians are taught, if you have a disease where you can no longer tolerate carbohydrates, you have type 2 diabetes, instead of vastly reducing or eliminating carbohydrates, look, just breakfast. I mean, breakfast has 67 grams of carbohydrates.
Yeah,
Lunch
that's a ton. So how much protein is in this?
55, maybe
That's
60 grams.
like the bare minimum. That's crazy.
When I transitioned to a ketogenic diet, and I got so much better so quickly, I very naively thought that I could help other people. My hospital would be very interested in this way of eating. You know, I did a bunch of research. I had access to I worked in an institution.
Why do you tell them to go to carnivore? Let's say, what is that doing? If you tell them to do that, and what is that doing chemically or like hormonally to their body?
When you follow a lower carb animal based diet, which is what, I advocate, you're actually able to fuel your brain with, fat and ketones. You're able to stabilize your blood glucose. So we want to stabilize.
Michelle Hurn is a registered dietitian. She left the corporate hospital system after years working there when she realized that the nutrition guidelines and the food that the hospitals were providing their clients, whether that was for mental health or physical health or eating disorders, wasn't actually helping them. Michelle's actually now carnivore unless she is doing ultra marathons, which she's then meat-based. And we get into the very, very simple solutions on how somebody can completely change their mental health issues, losing weight issues, hormone issues, and literally how straightforward this can be. So we get into all of this in this conversation. Go ahead and like it if you like it. Subscribe if you're into this kind of stuff. Go ahead and share it with somebody who needs to see it. Let's get into it. So Michelle, you have been a dietitian since 2009, right?
Correct.
Okay. And it seems like you've had this transition where you have experience working in like corporate America hospitals, let's say. And then you transitioned out of that into like you're doing your own practice. But can you help me understand why you left practicing as a dietitian? What was like the final straw that made you leave? Because it's kind of a big move to make.
Yeah, the final straw was getting my own health back. When you go through the internship and you become a dietitian, you're basically taught the standard of care is the nutrition guidelines. So that's what I practiced. That's what I followed. I was a very high carb athlete. I was a marathon runner, and I was dealing with chronic anxiety, depression. Went through periods where I had pretty severe suicidal ideation, and I was just told I have a history of an eating disorder. So that was my lot in life. That's what was always going to happen. And when I transitioned to a ketogenic diet, honestly, when I first did in fall of 2019, I was really scared. I was, am I going to have energy? We're taught as dietitians, your heart's going to explode. And I got so much better so quickly. Felt like lifetime anxiety got 90% better. My muscle pain got better. My energy was better. That I very naively thought that if I could help other people, my hospital would be very interested in this way of eating. I did a bunch of research. I had access to I worked in an institution, so I had access to clinical trials. And there were just so many on type 2 diabetes. Now we have them on traumatic brain injury, and there's the eating disorder trial and bipolar disorder. And knowing, it's like once you see it, you can't unsee it. Knowing that there was a way to eat that would actually help people and that the standard of care was actually hurting people, I just no longer, I couldn't ethically keep doing it. And, I get emails from young dietitians all the time. Like, what do I do? I'm stuck. And it was hard because, I had to stay for a little longer than I necessarily wanted to because of finances. But, once the pandemic hit, I actually lost most of my dietitian hours, and I was put in a call center, which is another crazy story. But I was fortunate that, my family, we were in a financial position where I could leave and, I found myself in my mid 30s working a minimum wage job, manually working on my hands. But it was really hard. But that also, the first time in my life, I had time. I had extra time. I wasn't working full time. And so actually that's when I wrote the book too.
Okay. So then you wrote this book about your experience, seeing kind of both worlds as a dietitian. This is something I think is really important to point out too before we go on, is like what you and I connected on initially was like a long time ago, was having eating disorders and living that life. I think that I find that when I talk about eating disorders or when I hear other people talking about it, sometimes the way we envision it is the most extreme that there was. And it sounds like yours was pretty extreme. Mine was pretty extreme. Like I was 5'8" and like I think 100 pounds. I think you were 5 feet and like 57 pounds or something like that, right? So like we were both pretty thin, but I was not hospitalized or anything like that. I was by all, like, I looked very thin, but I wasn't, so extreme. And I think that's really common, actually. That I think what I'm trying to get at is I think eating disorders are far more common than we like to make them out to be. And that is potentially why people are so anxious so much of the time. Not just because of like not eating enough, but then what the food that they are told to eat is what's actually causing the anxiety and then the depression. And this can go for the average person, right? Somebody who just eats, they skip meals because they ate too many processed foods the other day. Girls will do that all the time, or they just don't eat enough calories or blah, blah, blah. So I don't know. That's my take on it. Do you think that makes sense given your
No, I
experience?
totally think that makes sense. And I think also kind of what you're saying about like, you don't necessarily have to qualify for the DSM-5, meaning like you're super underweight or, you have all these specific things that have an eating disorder to have a horrible quality of life. You still have eating disorder behaviors and, the standard of care for eating disorders. One, it's not standardized at all. You can go somewhere in Texas, it's totally different than in California. And two, it's a massive failure. The anorexia specifically has the highest mortality rate of any psychiatric disorder.
Really?
Which is horrible. I mean, more people will die of anorexia than, schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, any other major depression, anxiety.
Wow, really?
Yeah. It's really sad. And also statistically too, it's not just from complications, although statistically about 20% of people with anorexia will be in and out of the hospital their whole life. Like they'll gain weight, lose weight, gain weight, lose weight, their quality of life is miserable. Another 20% of people actually will take their own life, which I find just heartbreaking, but also relatable. It feels hopeless. And like you said, when you're told like, okay, we're going to refeed you with the standard American diet, that way of eating, it in my experience increases anxiety. While you might, in many cases, I did become weight restored. You have this chronic, you're worrying about food, thinking about food. It basically controls your whole life. So often people will go into treatment, gain weight as they're, eating in these groups. But as soon as they're out, it's like, I don't want to feel awful anymore. So they just stop eating. So, what I advocate is let's eat in a way that doesn't make you feel awful. And I'm not saying it's easy, and I'm not saying you're not having to fight, food challenges and overcome fears and deal with your trauma and anxiety. But when you follow a lower carb animal based diet, which is what, I advocate, you're actually able to fuel your brain with, fat and ketones. You're able to stabilize your blood glucose. I've often thought, there's really good research study that people with any type of eating disorder, actually, this one was specifically on anorexia, but when you lose weight, the gray matter of your brain actually atrophies. And the good news is when you gain weight, it can, grow back. But it's like, well, what fat, what are you growing it back with? You grow all these inflammatory fats. Maybe that's not ideal. So yeah, the way we treat eating disorders is backwards, in my opinion, because you're not addressing metabolism. I think you're going to continue to have relapse. You're treating it like a psychiatric disorder, to where if I just give you talk therapy and I just teach you how to eat, it's going to be fine. But if you don't address the nutrition component by stabilizing blood glucose, by getting plenty of, fatty acids and vitamins and minerals to build neurotransmitters, you're going to be a mess. You're going to be a wreck. That's my overwhelming experience.
Okay. So I want to talk about how it sounds like you recommend the carnivore diet or meat-based mostly for people that are like, is that just people with eating disorders, or is that just in general people with like gut issues, mental health issues, so on and so forth?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Dr. Kenberry that it is the proper human diet. So yes, for everybody. And if somebody comes along and tells me they're on a vegan or vegetarian diet and they feel wonderful and they're metabolically healthy and things are great, like I have no agenda here. Like, great, I'm happy for you. Keep doing what's working well for you. But, yeah, humans evolved eating meat and fat. People are like, oh, meat's bad for you. Saturated fat's bad for you. If that were true, the human race wouldn't exist. We literally evolved eating the megafauna. And humans just are not very good at absorbing nutrition from plants. There's a lot of things in plants that prevent their absorption. There's fiber, there's phytic acid, there's lectins, there's all these other things. Where animal protein is very absorbable, has a high bioavailability. And we don't talk about that enough in nutrition. I like to think about bioavailability as just like your ability to absorb it. I mean, if you can't absorb it, it is effectively useless to you. It's like if I wrote you a check, I was like, all right, Lauren, here's a check for $1,000. And you're like, amazing. And you run to your bank account and they're like, she's got $17 in her bank account. It doesn't matter that it says $1,000. Can you access the funds? Or with protein, with animal protein, you get to access that protein. You can access all those vitamins and minerals. And with plants, you can't access most of it. The absorption rate is very poor. And I'm not anti-plant. I'm not anti-carbohydrate. I think they have their place in specific situations, and we can talk more about that. But throwing 60%, 70% carbohydrates at a damaged gastrointestinal system and expecting this person to recover well and not have massive blood sugar spikes and anxiety is just silly.
It's not gonna, I mean, let's go into, I want to share the recent guidelines that you shared with me. So I think what we're looking at is like 3 months ago, this is the guidelines that you were given, that all dietitians are given, that are updated, and they're pretty wild. Is that right? Like what are we looking at here?
Yeah, this is specifically this is specifically for type 2 diabetes. So this is for somebody who cannot tolerate carbohydrates. Actually, for people with eating disorders, it tends to be even more carbohydrates than this. So basically, dietitians are taught, if you have a disease where you can no longer tolerate carbohydrates, you have type 2 diabetes, instead of vastly reducing or eliminating carbohydrates, like just breakfast. I mean, breakfast has 67 grams of carbohydrates.
Yeah,
Lunch
that's a
is
ton.
70.
So it's orange juice, oatmeal. So that's like not naturally squeezed. Does it need to be naturally squeezed? Does it matter?
The hell if I know. I mean, what a mess, right?
Like one slice whole wheat toast. So 1/4 of a cup scrambled eggs. Like, how does that even work? 1/4 of a cup scrambled eggs? Like, is that an egg? Like, sugar-free jelly, 1 teaspoon margarine. Interesting. 1 cup light yogurt, no sugar added, pepper, sugar substitute plus sugar-free beverages. It's weird because it's really big on like the sugar-free stuff, which, okay, I get it, but that's like really highly processed stuff. All of this is pretty highly processed except for the 1/4 scrambled egg.
Yeah, and especially if you're in a hospital setting, it's probably garbage eggs. I mean, and they're doing the exchange system, right? Where it's like 1 slice of bread or 2, that's just not how the human body works. It's absolutely ridiculous. All this goofy, tiny bit of protein, lots of carbohydrates. I mean, 226 grams of carbohydrates for someone who cannot tolerate carbohydrates. For eating disorders, it tends to be, 300 to almost 400 grams of carbohydrates a day.
So how much protein is in this?
Oh God, probably, 3 ounces, 2 ounces, 1 ounce. So 55, maybe
that's
60 grams.
Like the bare minimum. That's crazy.
It's a good way to cause sarcopenia and, make sure your blood sugar spikes are as high as possible.
Yeah. I mean, so basically what this is like a vision into how our guidelines are training the people that are in charge of helping us improve our physical and mental health. With essentially the way I look at this looks like it's a great advertisement for mostly ultra processed foods. In like a weird way. Like you get the green salad and like the tablespoon, but like dressing, eat a low fat milk, like, I don't know, seasoned rice, like orange juice, mashed potatoes, like all of this, I suppose, isn't all ultra processed foods, but it just doesn't feel like there's a lot in here that feels like it's kind of like from the earth, if that makes sense. You know what I mean?
And I'm completely convinced that processed foods today are significantly worse than they were 10 years ago, 20 years ago. I mean, the amount of their ability to spike your blood sugar, their ability, we literally have food scientists. It's a full-time job for, when you eat a cookie or cracker or graham cracker, it lights up areas of your brain that prevent you from not, not saying no to, you keep coming back and eating more and more of it. And so and like you said, you have this, it's not even food. What is a graham cracker? I mean, it's ridiculous where if you want to heal, and this is why people really struggle when we talk about like you need to eat a lot more protein, you need to axe the carbs. Like, wait, I thought I was supposed to eat like two ounces. That's nothing. Eating 6 ounces, 8 ounces at a meal. Because when you're eating more real food, like you said, like these real whole from the earth foods, they will have what you need. They're going to have the protein, the vitamins, the minerals, the cofactors, where all this processed stuff is just a mess.
Yeah, I actually interviewed a food scientist, which was really interesting because I brought him on. He was also on the Wall Street Journal, which is how I found him. And basically I was just like, yeah, what's your opinion on these foods? And like, what do you think they're harmful in any way? And he didn't think so. And he didn't think seed oils were harmful at all. But then he started talking about how he'd never eat. There's like two things he would never eat. He would never eat hot dogs because they have nitrates in them, and that freaked him out. And then he also said he could never start eating an Oreo because then he would keep eating them because they're just so good. And so then I was talking to him about like, how does it work to be a food scientist? And he's like, well, yeah, basically you're trying to get the sugar and the fat and the texture and all that just right so that it's so, so good that people just want to keep eating it. And so it's this interesting thing where they're designing the food to be basically you can't stop eating it. But then the way they get away with it is that the portion size, it's what's recommended, and everything is okay if you eat it within that portion size. But because it's designed by the food scientist to be addictive, no one can do that because it's not designed to do that, right? So that's where I thought it was interesting. I was like, what an interesting little loophole there. We're all thinking we're making it just this normal food. You're making an addictive thing, that like, no one can, you're literally designing an addictive thing.
Yeah.
Like,
and then you're blaming, but then it's not my fault, it's your fault because you're
right.
late, and the serving size is 2 cookies and you ate the whole sleeve. So you're lazy and gluttonous and, screw you. I mean, that's what the food industry has taught us, that it's our fault. So that's what dietitians say, we'll just do it in moderation, which once again what does moderation mean? I mean, is that once a week, once a month, once a year, now 20 times? Nobody knows. But if you just tell someone, well, eat a healthy diet, but it's okay to have cookies in moderation, but then you have the food scientists design the cookies to where you literally can't stop eating them. And who do we give cookies to? Kids, young people. I mean, they can't, they have no reference even. So they're just, of course they're going to keep eating. I mean, the obesity amongst children is increasing exponentially, right? And then our elderly who desperately need more protein and vitamins and minerals, giving them desserts and processed foods and all these things. There's, as much as sarcopenia is an issue, which is muscle wasting, sarcopenic obesity is even more of a problem. I had people in the hospital I'd treat that were so overly fat and under muscle, they couldn't even get up and walk like 10 steps to the bathroom. So, but once again, the food industry, it's like, have fun, you're enjoying this is all those commercials, it's cool, it's fun. But then they also mock you with their advertising, but you can't eat just one. Once you pop, you can't stop, you're not wrong. So it's wild because I don't think as a society we would tolerate that with, other things. Like certainly, we recognize in society there are certain substances that are potentially dangerous. We recognize that cigarettes, you can't have them unless you're 18. There's labels. If you saw someone smoking, you're like, we know that's bad. Like everyone kind of recognizes that. Alcohol, while people enjoy alcohol, we restrict it. You can't, clearly you have to be 21. Things like cocaine and stuff, we're like, no, this is very bad for society. But sugar, which we know is, causing so many issues in processed foods, people hand out at a baseball game, or a kid's soccer game.
Yeah, like it's nothing. And that's the thing, I think, that to tie it into kind of like everyday people, I don't think that we recognize that our anxiety and our like issues with depression and struggles with, mood overall, or even like, everybody struggled with like that one little last 10, 20 pounds of weight to lose that you just really can't lose, like love handles or really real, like every single day problems. This doesn't need to be like you're hospitalized. I'm talking like day-to-day problems. are tied back to this, because like it's not real food that we're eating. And I think particularly for people that struggle, the reason I started with carnivore and loved it is because it completely changed my relationship with food.
Yeah.
So I actually was like eating full meals, eating like, normal amounts. And like, again, I was living in society as a normal person, right? But like always had food on my mind, always knew how many calories was in every single thing I ate, always hyper conscious of when I ate, sometimes starved myself, was bulimic at some points. Just like a lot of things that normal people experience. I believe that we are experiencing that because the ingredients in our fake food are not helping us be full, not helping our gut. So like, can you help me understand what actually, like what carnivore did for me? Like if, what did it do? How did I
Well,
get
and real
fixed?
quick, I just want to piggyback off, like you were saying,
Yeah.
all these processed foods are not allowing us to be full, are constantly making us like think about food and worry about food. And if somebody out there doesn't believe they're addictive, okay, food can't be addictive. You yourself, or ask somebody that drinks soda or eats a lot of, sugar, ask them to give it up for a week and see what
Right.
their response is. People
Ain't gonna
act like,
happen.
oh man, I had a woman tell me if I touched her soda, she'd break both my arms in the hospital, right? Like people,
What?
oh yeah. So
God.
she has to get out of bed first. She's
Yeah.
very obese.
Can't catch me.
But people are truly addicted. So what did carnivore do for you? So first of all, there is actually another research study, and it's like I feel like sometimes we see these studies and it's like my 6-year-old niece could figure this out. Processed foods will increase your blood glucose and cause an insulin response similar to pharmaceutical drugs. Like if I gave you a straight shot, like you were having a hypoglycemic episode of glucose, like right into your veins, you'd get this huge response and this huge blood sugar crash. That's what is happening with a lot of these processed foods. We're taking in 5, 6, sometimes 800 calories of this frappuccino or God knows what else. And we're hungry 2 hours later. You're hungry, you're dizzy, you're shaky because you're getting a blood glucose response. We're worried about calories or whatever. And we should be, how do these foods impact our hormones? How does this impact glucose and insulin and cortisol and leptin and ghrelin? And so carnivore, what it does is it stabilizes blood glucose. Protein has a very small blood glucose response and insulin response. Fat is negligible. And also what's happening is you're finally getting your brain needs certain things to function that are absent in processed foods. It needs B vitamins, it needs iron, zinc, folate. It needs, the cofactors, the carnitine, the taurine, the carnosine, all those things. And we've stopped eating. It used to be years ago, you probably have a processed food like once a month, maybe. And now we're having them daily, every day, sometimes multiple times a day.
Yeah.
And
It's
so
like
by eating,
75% of our
yeah,
diet.
it's amazing. I forgot there's a crazy statistic on how often people eat like fast food. Now I know when I'm out in the running in the morning, there's a McDonald's like on my running route, and the line, it's like 6:30 in the morning, and the line, no one else running, lots of people
Damn.
in that line.
That's crazy.
And it's not judgment, it's just choices. It's
Yeah.
just realizing that, wow, these things are powerful,
It's lack of
And
awareness, I think, too. Lack
it
of
is.
awareness. Yeah.
And we also, I think, there's a saying that I truly believe that where you place blame, you place power. As a society, often, it's like, oh, it's my job's fault, it's my wife's fault, it's my kid's fault, and I'm fat. Oh, I hate it. Ultimately, when you take personal responsibility, I mean, that will change your life. It's my fault. Like when I had, kind of my come to Jesus moment, when I changed my life, changed how I ate, took full responsibility. Because if it's somebody else's fault, then you can never fix it or change it. When you adopt the meat-based diet, you're finally, especially if you're completely carnivore for a while, higher fat, you're likely going to be in ketosis. And your brain runs so effectively and efficiently on ketones. A lot of people report this clear thinking. For me, the reduction of anxiety, finally being nourished. It's something that a lot of people haven't experienced in years, some people ever. And it really changes your perspective on everything. I found that I'm calmer. I'm a better, worker, I'm a better wife, better dog mom, better community member. It has a ripple effect too to every area of your life. And it's sad because, right now, I mean, depression is off the chart. Anxiety is off the chart. People are getting sicker and sicker and sicker. And we're just seeing, I'm not as hopeful as you might potentially be for like big policy changes in our food system. So I believe we really have to like put that armor on. I always tell my clients I work with, when you go outside, because you won't be able to go anywhere in your life without being offered crappy food. Like from Home Depot to the vet clinic to the gas station, there's always crappy food. And so it's like making that active choice that like I love my life so much that I'm going to continue to eat this way. I can eat anything I want anytime I want. I'm an adult, because I think if you're like, I'm never eating that again, your brain's like cake, 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 cake. So it's being able to say like, I'm choosing this. And then you set yourself in your life up in a way where you enjoy your meals. Like, I've been doing this since 2018 and I never feel deprived. Meat, fat are delicious. I'm a long distance runner, so I have some whole food carbohydrates. But it's amazing that people, as a society, we still haven't quite wrapped our head around coming back to like real whole foods.
Yeah, I think my sister and I talk about this sometimes, where we had to shift our perspective from looking at processed foods as just like sometimes here and there to like really an addiction, and like treating it as such rather than just allowing it to come in. Because once you start, you really can't stop. It's very challenging. Some people can, but not me. Not I. I just want. I just want to keep going. Not even the food scientist that I interviewed. He said he literally is like, I can't eat Oreos. I'll just keep going and going. So, with people who you work with. So, let's say you have, I don't know, a teenager who needs some assistance because they have eating disorder problems. They're not hospitalized, but their parents are concerned with them. I talk to these people all the time, by the way, the parents, who are concerned about their kids because they have eating disorders. Is there something that you like, why do you tell them to go to carnivore? Let's say, what is that doing if you tell them to do that? And what is that doing chemically or like hormonally to their body that allows them to feel full? You mentioned like ghrelin and lectin is triggered, like lowering cortisol, insulin levels are more balanced. But is there something that's like healing too, that they can eventually not just do carnivore and then have a normal life?
Yeah, and it's it's nuanced. Like
Okay.
every person that comes to me, we don't do full carb. And sometimes the parents, certainly if they're under 18, we'll have either the parents on the call or on the call initially. Sometimes the parents are like, I can't have them do full carnivore, but what our dietitian is doing is not working. Can we go more meat based? Which I think that's a start, right? A lot of times when people are restricting, or they're eating less meat, or they're eating very low fat, or they're restricting calories. And so, the number one goal, like you said, we want to stabilize blood glucose. We've got to get them to a place where they're not going to be anxious, disease, shaky, hungry. And the best way to do that is animal protein and fat, my overwhelming experience. So like just doing that really helps. But yeah, when we talk about healing too, like especially if you've been restricting or binging and purging, your GI, your system, is damaged. I like to think about it, if you were in a bike race and you crashed, you had this big road rash, and then, our current treatments, has these Ensure drinks and all this, salads and chicken. It's like, that's like taking a scrub brush. Like, we need easy to digest foods, and that's another thing, is meat and fat is very easy to digest and process. It doesn't have all the sugar, starches, fibers. And so I find that just not having all the digestive discomfort is helpful. And yeah, once again, the brain healing, the fact that you're finally having all the vitamins, minerals. Yeah. And, it's very interesting that people with, specifically with anorexia, some of their hunger cues are just messed up because they've been ignoring them, or, trying to like mentally override them. So sometimes that takes time. But when you're eating, because we have really good feedback mechanisms for animal protein and fat. Like an example, like you're talking about the food scientist with the Oreos, there's not good feedback mechanisms. They're literally using science and technology to override any feedback mechanism. But most people, let's say you ate a 16-ounce steak or a 12-ounce steak, very rarely are you going to be like, God, I really need, can we order another one? You're like, whoa, I'm good. Thank you. I feel very full and satiated. So teaching people that they can feel full and they can feel safe and they can feel satiated. Because when you get those huge blood sugar spikes and crashes with all this processed food, the whole all foods fit for people with eating disorders, that doesn't feel safe. That doesn't feel good to them. So that's another reason, being able to finally feel good, satiated,
Oh, it's
calm
huge.
is
Is that
huge.
why then, that because of the blood sugar? Because that was my thing always, is like I never got full. So it's not like I wanted to have an eating disorder. It's not like I was trying. I just wanted to be thin and look good. And the problem was that I couldn't eat the same things that my friends would eat and still feel full. I would have to keep eating, which is like more calories. And then you have, you gain weight because of it. So like, what is the satiety factor that comes with eating like a steak or something that we're creating in the brain? Or is it
Yeah.
weaning off of sugars?
Yeah, I mean, I think it can be multifaceted. Some people are definitely more prone to insulin or insulin. Well, let's say both you and your friend were just going to use a processed food. Well, you guys both ate a cookie. You may have a bigger insulin response than they do. So, you guys both get a blood glucose response. You get a bigger, insulin response. You might be hungry in like half an hour, where they're
Okay.
just like, oh, whatever, we're messing around. They're not as,
Yeah.
so that can play a factor in it. But yeah, protein, I mean, it just has to do with the rate of digestion. It has to do with, the breakdown of amino acids and things. It's just satiating. I mean, protein is the most satiating macronutrient. They've actually even done some studies that people who overeat from their basal metabolic rate, like hypothetically, you're only supposed to eat 2,000 calories, you're going to gain weight. They eat 2,500 calories, but it's protein. They don't, so yeah, I don't know. I'm sure there's more and complex mechanisms, but I think the fact that you eat in your body, like it's almost like you can trust your body again.
Totally.
It's
That's
not
how
like you
I
said,
felt.
like you're constantly thinking about food. Oh no, what am I going to eat? Should I eat that?
Yeah.
You just eat and you feel
Then you're
satiated. And
good.
it's very hard because everywhere you go in this world, like even just last night, my wife and I were out at a friend's house and they're like, oh, you don't want to eat the cupcakes? It's like, no, I just ate like 3 times as much animal protein as you did. Everyone's eating these tiny amounts of protein and then now eating all this junk. And so you do have to be different than the rest of the world. But in my experience, the reward of calm and just being able to function and not have anxiety is massive.
Massive. Yeah. So like if you were to have somebody come in and like work with you, whether they, it's totally nuanced. I hear you on that. Like protein amounts versus like if you're going to be carnivore or meat based, is there like a minimum that somebody should have in terms of grams of protein and animal fat that you're like, okay, well, at least, bare minimum this?
Well, I mean, it would depend on their weight and age and
Sure.
all of that. And I
Let's
mean,
say they're
I know
150.
just kind of like I know Dr. Gabriel Lyons is very big, especially for female, on like 35 grams of protein per meal, so that's, in a full day, 105 grams. I find sometimes with the young people, especially women, I mean, especially if you've been under eaten for a while. Let's say I have a 14-year-old who's really been going through it for 2 years. She might need a lot of calories for a while. And that can be scary for someone, because it's like, okay, I've been eating 500 calories. I've been restricting myself. It's like, we may have to get to 4,000, like a lot of calories if you're underweight. And it won't be like that forever.
Yeah.
So
But let's start
stick with
there.
me. And sometimes, I mean, it can vary. Sometimes it's really hard and scary. Some people find it empowering and exhilarating. Like, wow, I'm eating all this and I finally don't hate myself and hate my life. And, I'm gaining weight and I'm actually okay with it. So, but yeah, I would say the bare minimum, I would say, would be about 30 to 35 grams per meal. I mean, unless they're, I guess, so much is height and weight, because you also work with men who are 6 feet tall and you might need more. But yeah, I mean, and that may sound like a lot. And for how much we eat in America, we don't usually, most people don't get up and have 30 or 35 grams of protein per meal, having cereal or Pop-Tarts or oatmeal or whatever. So it is shifting how you think about food. It's not this ridiculous huge salad with, tiny bit of protein. It's 6 ounces of protein, 8 ounces of protein per meal, you know? But once again, your calories are now coming from protein and fat versus carbohydrates. So really leaning into that.
Yeah. And I think it's so important, like the animal fat factor too is huge. Do you find that, I mean, that from everybody I've learned from in my own research, that seems like such an important piece to this is animal fat. Would you agree?
Yeah. And isn't that ironic? Because my whole dietetic career, I was told that would make your heart explode, and that's bad for
Yep.
you. And that's, but
What do
we
they
can
tell
talk
you to
about it.
replace it with?
Yeah. And then you replace it with the canola oil and all the but yeah, what I found that saturated fat, and once again, remember too, especially for young people with eating disorders or anybody, if you've lost weight and you're going to have the gray matter of your brain atrophy, you're going to have your body clearly atrophy. So when we're rebuilding, what do we want to rebuild with? We want to rebuild with, the best high quality nutrition. And saturated fat is an excellent source of those fat soluble vitamins, D, E, A, K. Those are important in your skin, your bone health, all those things, obviously rebuilding your brain matter. And it is interesting that I've seen people, and it's so counterintuitive. It was so strange for me when I first started because, I would eat small amounts of fat. So I'm like, I'm eating a bunch of butter. I'm eating bone marrow. I'm eating all the fat. Like it feels strange. But once again, people tend to find it's kind of exhilarating. Like, wow, this is cool. And you feel better. And so, yeah, I'm a big fan of animal fat. I mean, and that's to say, like, if somebody says, I really like coconut oil, I really like lean olive oil, that's fine. But I definitely am more lean into the animal fats.
Do you get a lot of hate for this from your peers that are not necessarily in the same lane? Yeah.
Yes, I'm waiting for like Abby Sharp or somebody to make a video. Maybe when I do my what I eat in a day. Before I left the hospital setting, so completely lost my health. I decided to give up running. My whole life was a train wreck. And when I shifted my health, within 6 months, long-term anxiety was gone. Everything in my life was better. I was able to run again. I was training for a long race. And one of the dietitians I was working with, who's very obese, pulled me aside and said, like, all this meat is bad for your health. Like the cognitive dissonance is amazing. And yeah, at least once a week, I'll get some dietitian that either hits my social media or sends me a personal email that says I'm setting people with eating disorders back and this is terrible and all foods can fit. And,
really? I think. And you were doing carnivore or meat based when this shift happened for you?
Yeah, I went full carnivore for a month. Like other than coffee, I did drink coffee, but no carbs, just, I would say 90% beef. We did a little bit. I probably did a little bit of chicken or pork or something, but mostly beef and butter and large amounts. This was my first, I transitioned into it. There were times I was like, am I eating a pound of meat a meal? I guess this is what we're doing. Like I said, I was a little bit scared, but I don't know. I can't exactly describe to you why I really wanted to do this, why I wanted to keep going. I just had this intuition that, at the time I was having a lot of muscle pain. Like, okay, maybe this will just help my muscles. I had no idea it would, flip my anxiety. It would change my life, allow me to run again. And so that's why I'm such a huge fan. If we can replace all the garbage we eat with like animal protein and then if you're going to have plants or carbohydrates, use them like specifically and strategically. Like I would never depend on vegetables for my nutrition. It's like a little bit of like a filler. This is fun. Yay, basil. It's like people who think you're going to be getting like all your nutrition from that is so strange to me.
Yeah. I think it would be really challenging. I've had a couple vegan doctors come on and they would have opposing views with carnivore doctors and that kind of thing. And I think it's possible to find success in a plant-based diet, right? Like I'm sure you've seen that. You mentioned before, either way is fine, how everyone does it. But like,
if it works for you, I would never tell somebody who's healthy and happy to do something.
Yeah. It just looks so hard. And like just so many complexities to it. To do that. But I think the last thing I want to get into is just what you've seen with people with like type 2 diabetes. I don't know anything about the work that you do, not in the way that you do. When I started getting into this world and realized how valuable carnivore was for me is when I started to care about food, and started to pay attention. And just intuitively, before I knew anything, I felt like the whole like injecting people with insulin thing seemed backwards.
Yes.
Like, I was just like, why don't we do the thing that would help lower the insulin, like rather than just pump them full of it?
Well, and it just, even from a health perspective, because if you have type 2 diabetes, there's no room left at the end. Your cells are saturated with glucose, right? There's your muscle cells, your liver cells. There's literally nowhere for the glucose to go. And that's why it's elevated in your bloodstream. So
well, and let's iron that out too, so people understand that. Like, I think that's important. How does that work? Like the insulin with the sugar and the cells and the blood and all that, if you could.
Yeah, because normally when you eat carbohydrates, you're going to get a blood glucose response. Your blood glucose is going to increase. Insulin comes in, your pancreas secretes insulin. And also, insulin is a very powerful hormone. It stops fatty acid oxidation like immediately. What does that mean? it basically tells your body like, hey, look, we've got all this carbs and the sugar. We don't need to burn fat. We're just going to burn sugar. So burning fat is very important if you're trying to lose weight, if you're trying to have stable energy, trying to be a functioning human. We need to be metabolically flexible. We need to be able to burn both fat and carbs, ideally mostly fat. Most people can almost never access their own fat stores, and our ability to store fat is unlimited. So anyway, you get this blood glucose goes up with carbs, insulin comes in, and then in a metabolically healthy person, it will go into, your either muscle cells or liver cells and be stored for later use. And, when you're constantly eating carbohydrates and sugar over time, your cells become saturated. I said, there's no room left. I like the image of like a hoarder's house, like stuff is like spilling out. Like in that scenario, what does it make sense to do if you watch those shows? We need to get stuff out of here. We need to stop putting in new stuff.
Right.
Because in our current medical system says it's fine, just keep putting in stuff. We'll just inject you with insulin. Well, okay, so the question is then, where does those carbohydrates go? Or because Michelle I just said that, hey, the muscle cells, liver cells are saturated, blood glucose goes up, I give you insulin. It doesn't just disappear into this magical universe, it has to go somewhere. So it gets stored as fat. And depending on your genetics, it can get stored as visceral fat. Visceral fat is the fat around your organs, which is incredibly dangerous. That's why type 2 diabetics have a 2 to 4-fold risk of heart disease. And so, a lot of people, oh, my blood sugar is fine. I just, eat carbs consistently and dose with insulin. That is a terrible idea. I've never seen somebody get better doing that. That will help you progress from type 2 diabetes to, kidney failure, amputations. And it doesn't have to be that way. Once again, with the hoarder's house, what do? Get some shit out of there. You need to, you can do some light movement. Now you can burn those carbs. And for the love of God, stop putting stuff in there. So vastly reducing their carbohydrates. And this is so counterintuitive to people because they've been told like, oh, I just, people I work with are like, doctors just kept giving me meds. They told me to eat healthy, which what the hell does that mean? They need very specific guidelines. No, we're not putting you on insulin because that's going to keep you sick forever. Yes, we are putting you on this very low carbohydrate diet, and that will help get your blood sugar down.
Right. So the low carb approach, it's so funny to talk about. I always used to think that was such a cheesy thing to say, the low carb thing, like it's just like you hear your mom talk about that, right? Like a low carb diet, but like it really is like a game changer for people in their mental health, their physical health. It's like, just get the sugar because like the plants will break down into sugars is essentially what's also going to help spike the insulin.
And that's another thing that I found working with the vast majority of people is a lot of people don't fully appreciate all the foods that have carbs. The particular company I work with, a lot of people have the CGM. So, they'll message me, like I see the blood sugar increase and they're like, I didn't know, I just had a big bowl of vegetables. I'm like, did you? And it's like, oh, it's corn. People that know corn has carbohydrates, fruit has carbohydrates, I just had some sliced beets, carbohydrates. So it's becoming really educated. What does low carb mean? And it's mostly those animal protein. We're focusing on protein, on fat. And some people do the very low carbohydrate vegetables, a little bit of lettuce, a little bit of salad, a little bit of something. And that I've seen overwhelming success with that. And the beautiful thing about that is it doesn't take a long time. I shared with you before we started recording, I had a woman whose blood sugars were in the 500s on 200 units of insulin. That is an astronomical amount. She's 37. They told her, like, you're going to lose your eyesight soon. And she's, doing the best she can, working 2 jobs, hustling. And so, the doctor I work with took her off all insulin, said, you are going to just follow this low carb diet strictly. And she said, like, after a couple of weeks, she's like, yeah, my boyfriend and I, we had to go into Walgreens and we were pricking my finger because they didn't believe the CGM. She's like, I hadn't had it under 200 in 3 years. And it was already in the 160s.
In like no time.
Weeks. People are diabetic for decades.
Yeah.
And so it just hurts my heart that we have this information, we have access to it, but we don't talk about it and prescribe it because the type 2 diabetes industry makes $420 billion with a B dollars. That was the 2022 stat. I'm sure it's more than that now.
Billion.
But we're making people suffer and die because of profit.
Yeah, it's like it can be so simple of just basically cut out most plants and processed foods for such like a few months, a couple months, and just see how that does for your insulin. That's going to save people so much money. It's like, holy
Extremely. I mean,
crap.
because health is, you have a major health scare, it can bankrupt you, right? But
Oh
it's
my God.
also people, like you said, are addicted to these processed foods. It's very hard. A lot of people are like, this is my comfort. This is what I do for stress. This is what I do when I'm bored. I had people telling me my stomach is full, my brain is hungry. So it does take time, and it does take, a little bit of grit. That's another thing. I think in society, we need to suck it up a little bit more. We've had all these dumb dietitians be like, oh, it's okay. No, don't eat it in moderation. Toughen up. You're going to feel better and be a better human. You can do this. Stop being a pansy.
Yeah, I think that there's this negative sentiment towards being extreme. I was just talking about this a couple weeks ago. But in this world today, you kind of have to be extreme to like keep your shit together. Like
The
truly.
world will mow you over and throw you out the door if you're not. Like,
Yeah, it's
it
like,
is so easy just to be pushed aside. And yeah, you have to say no. No, thank you. No more. I choose. I mean, that's right. I choose to get up every morning. I choose to run. I choose to eat in this way. Because if not, you honestly, you don't have a shot. The world is designed to keep you fat, depressed, and sick. And so if you don't want to be those things, which I'm guessing most people watching do not, you got to really be brave and really toughen up and surround yourself with people that are like you, that can encourage you and lift you up. And you're going to find yourself constantly setting boundaries and sometimes disappointing grandma at Thanksgiving when you say no, thank you. But, you stand firm in this. I mean, just my experience is your whole life will be better.
yeah, no, I agree. And I think the attitude of like picking things to be extreme about, like I think about processed foods, I'm extreme about them now. I don't like, I'm not perfect. I'll slip up sometimes, but day to day, I don't have processed foods at all. Because I've realized that is an addictive thing. I'll end with this. Do you think that processed foods are causing addictions for people versus they have addictive personalities, let's say, which then lead to, food disorders, eating disorders, diabetes, so on and so forth? Do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, I have a friend, I've talked to a few friends about this specifically, like in the mental health space. And I am 100% sure there are certain personalities that are more driven, maybe more prone to being addicted to certain things. But we also know that processed foods are changing your brain chemistry. You can literally see it on MRI images. They are creating new brain pathways. And so it could even be the perfect storm to where anybody who has processed foods over time is going to be more apt to go to processed foods, even if you don't have a potential to have addictive behavior, but especially like God help you if you maybe do. So I think it could be, a little bit of either, but if we know we have something that we know is changing our brain chemistry. I mean, to me, I just wouldn't mess with it. I don't, it's like certain drugs. Like I have no interest in messing around with that. That sounds like a bad idea. And yeah, and I think we don't treat processed foods that way at all. Like I said, we'll give it to our kids, we'll pass it out at a soccer game. And most people are really careful with even alcohol. Most people are really careful with. And we recognize like, hey, this person is an alcoholic. Don't offer them. We respect that, whatever. But if someone said like, hey, like I can't have processed foods, I don't, or I'm not going to have sugar. I'm dealing with a sugar addiction. People would be like, oh, come
Yeah,
on.
they make fun of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I agree completely. Well, yeah, this has been really fascinating. I think it's really important to understand how we can, for so many people who have weird relationships to food, this can change that completely, which for them starting out, it sounds like if you can start out with carnivore and clean up the gut microbiome, clean up the hormone issues, the, insulin levels and all of it that are causing, that we've been trained into basically by these ultra processed foods that we grew up with. And we just don't even have a baseline of knowing how to properly eat or feeling what it feels like to feel full. So I think like for so many people, people don't need to stay carnivore. That's something that people get wrong. They think you start carnivore and it's like this forever thing. It's like stick with it for some time and then go from there. Would you agree with that?
Oh, 100%. And most people that do a full carnivore diet, like after a certain period of healing, whether that's 30 days or a few months, find that they heal enough to where they can include some other foods, as I think is totally appropriate. Some people might be carnivore forever, but I would say 95% of people end up saying like, oh yeah, I found I can add asparagus, or we have some whole food carbohydrates. And, certainly for, if you're super active, you can work those in, but then you have that foundation of a healthy, like you said, a healthy gut, a healthy microbiome, where most of our population, I would imagine, just doesn't have a healthy foundation. So getting back to that first is really powerful.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, where can people find you and get your books and see more about your work and possibly work with you?
So my website, thedietitiansdilemma.net, you can find all the information about my books. I'm not taking new clients right now, but
Yeah, you're busy.
I have a wait list if you want to email me. And Instagram, I'm at Run, Eat, Meet, Repeat. On X, I am Michelle Hurn RD. And yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah, and you do ultra marathon runs and all that stuff too, right?
I do. I did a 50-mile race this past November. It was
That's
awesome.
amazing.
It was my fastest 50-mile. It was pretty cool out in Chicago. And then
Wow.
I have a 12-hour race coming up in June. So I'm going to try to break the course record.
Oh my God, that's awesome. I'm a runner too. I don't do 50, but I do like a solid 15.
There you go. That's solid. That's great.
Yeah, so cool. Right on. Well, I appreciate it, Michelle. Thank you.
You're so welcome. Thanks for having me.
All right.